YouTube is now Olympus Reptiles, and we're bringing you some more reptile myths to bust. Myths. There are just a few words in the English language I think every human being struggles to pronounce. For me, myth is one of them. I can say it's a myth. That's a myth. But I can't say it plural. Myths. Myth. Those are myths. Anyway, back to my personal topic. Enough making fun of myself. First one is going to be counting rattles on a rattlesnake equals the age of the snake. And this is like a half-truth. And what I mean is, the myth, what the myth actually says is that for every rattle is 1 year of age. So if you look at a rattlesnake and you're like, come here, rattlesnake, and it's going to cooperate and you can pick it up and put on the head and it go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You're a 7-year-old rattlesnake. Put it back down. That is not true. That is an absolute myth. Now, the truth is they get a new piece of rattle every time they shed. So if you have a snake with a complete rattle, you could tell how many times that snake had shed by the number of rattles it has. But most of them don't shed once every year. When they're young, they'll shed more frequently than as they're adults. They'll shed less, maybe only 2 to 3 times a year. But it is per shed, not per year. They're not a tree, okay? They're not a tree. They're a snake. It's different. Not a tree. The other thing is, a lot of wild snakes will break that rattle. Because that rattle goes through brush, it goes through bushes, it goes down holes, it goes everywhere, it gets banged on stuff. And it's just like fingernail type of material. It's a specialized skill. It's just interlinked. So it'll get cracked and brittle and break, and pieces will break off. Well, if a piece here gets broken, it'll lose all of this. So the rattle, unless it comes to a complete fine point, is not complete. You can actually kind of get an idea of how old one is, whether it's older or younger, more on how blunt the rattle is, because that'll tell you how blunt that tail has gotten. But you cannot count rattles and say that equals number of years. On the complete rattle, you can get an idea of age based on number of sheds. On to the next one. Snakes are mostly tail. Seems plausible. Let's look at a snake. Let's look at a snake. Let's pick one we didn't pick last time. And let's go with you. Hi, pretty. I can see where people get that idea. It is a long tube. So I can see where people think, well, snakes are mostly tail. But the fact is, how much of a snake is a tail? I would say if you were going to say it was mostly tail, that would mean that her tail would start right about here. That's not the case. Snakes do have a defined tail. And where that tail starts is right here. That's the cloaca. In layman's terms, the butthole. And when you go past the butthole, that is all going to be the tail. So there's your tail. This is the body. And tail. Makes sense? So only this much of this particular snake is tail. And not very much of it all. It is mostly actually body. Of course, this is our Calico Blitz. Just a beautiful, beautiful snake. So we'll put her back. You want to go back? Huh? You ready? No? You want to hang out a little while longer? Come on. You got to get back in there. I got work to do. But I will get that out of there for you. So, they're not mostly tail. Now, some snakes do have a longer tail than others. When you get into your tree pythons, they'll have more tail than, say, a ball python will, but it still is definitely not most of the snake. Snakes are deaf. That's a half-truth. That's a half-truth. Now, let me show you what I mean. How are you feeling today? Okay, there's a couple differences between a snake and a lizard. Let me share those with you. You're thinking, all right, feet, legs. No! No! Legs have nothing to do with it, because there are lizards that do not possess legs. Legless lizards. They're pretty aptly named. But there are two features that can easily tell them apart. One, if you look at the eyes on the snake, it has no eyelids, right? It's just eyes. Lizards have eyelids, snakes don't. The other thing that is missing from its head, ear holes. Lizards typically have ear holes. They don't have ear lobes, but they have ear holes. Snakes do not have ear holes. That leads it to believe that the snakes are deaf. That's where that myth comes from. And what's true, if I were to... We did name the snake, but I don't remember what I named it right now. Do you, Kurt? I have to look back in the record to rename it. But let's say I named him George. And I was like, oh, George, you're such a pretty snake. Your name is George. Will you come to your name, George? He ain't going to do it. He ain't hearing that shit. He's not picking up sound like the way you and I pick up sound. Even though he's missing the ear holes, though, he does possess all the small bones for an ear, and it does wire to his brain for an auditory signal. What that means is he'll pick up the vibrations. Airborne sound waves, not so much, but things walking in the forest, things making a big thump, maybe a loud bass that you can feel, they're going to feel that in those ears just like we do, but they're not going to necessarily hear me talking or process sound like we process it, because the sound waves aren't actually getting in, but the vibrations still can. So they're not truly deaf. They do process sound. It's just vastly different, go on, buddy, than the way we think of it. I still talk to them. I know a lot of keepers still talk to their snakes, but it does absolutely no good. If I wanted to stomp around them, they'd be more likely to hear that than me actually talking to them. And, oh, there we got our mist back. Woo! That was kind of a scary moment. Milk snakes drink milk. It's actually an internet myth. Okay, milk snakes don't drink milk. Okay, they're not frickin' mammals. They're not going to go up to their mama when they're born, find the teat, and drink milk. Not going to happen. They also are not going to go out in the wild, find a cow, and find that teat and drink milk. Not going to happen. They're going to eat meat, and they're going to drink water. That's it, folks. That's all there is to it. That's the facts. Milk snakes do not drink milk. All right. Ooh, this is one of my favorite. Snakes kill by asphyxiation. And if you go back and you watch some of our videos, I've been talking about how horrible of a person I am for allowing rats to die. This horrible, horrible death of asphyxiation. And this is a myth that was actually believed for a very, very long time. And people thought this was true. Even in the scientific community, they were like, this is how snakes kill. And it makes sense. You know, they coil around. And the old thing we were taught in school is as you exhale and you get smaller, they get tighter. You can't expand your lungs, so you can't get air back in, and you slowly die from asphyxiation. And that sounds like some shit out of nightmares, right? It's not true. Can they kill that way? Yeah, they likely can in a pinch, but that is not typically how death occurs. What they have found that happens, and they did this by taking studies, and what they did is they took rabbits that were pre-killed, and they hooked fake circulatory systems up to it, right? Cool, got this big old rabbit, and they'd open up and be like, hey, snaky snake, here's a rabbit. And the snake, of course, would bite that rabbit and coil around that rabbit. Come here, girlie. And then they could do all kinds of measurements based on that, you know, fake circulatory system. What they found is constrictors coil so tight and are so strong that when they take this body and they wrap it around and they hit that squeeze, what typically happens is the blood can't flow. They're actually shutting off the blood flow. So the heart beats, and the blood ain't going anywhere, right? So what that causes is an instantaneous cardiac problem. Your brain not getting fresh blood, not getting oxygenated blood. Your heart is going to go into a bad rhythm more often than not because it can't beat. So it's trying to squeeze that blood out, and it can't do so, throwing that rhythm off, causing a heart stoppage. And so what you end up having is a very, very quick and effective death. You'll see a lot of nerves and things kicking, but when a constrictor kills its prey, it's actually very fast. And what led them to that question was, if this snake was in the wild, eating live prey all the time, which this snake has been fed live prey its entire life, why are they not scarred up? Rodents have sharp teeth, they have good claws, they would be kicking and biting, and you will still get a snake occasionally bit. But if you imagine if you're dying from asphyxiation and you got 45 seconds of fight left in you, you're not going to go, huh, well, guess this shit sucks, and wait to die. You're going to kick, you're going to bite, you're going to scratch, you're going to claw, you're going to do everything you can to get out of that situation, correct? And look, do you see scars? You don't, because there aren't any. And they were finding wild snakes, and they would expect them to be scarred up, and they weren't. And that's what led to the question of, well, why aren't they scarred up? What is actually happening during that fight for life? And that was when they decided to test that and got their answer of how quick that death was and how efficient of a predator these things really are, which is awesome because we didn't really know that till recently. And how cool is that? So anyway, death by asphyxiation, not usually. Death by your whole cardiac system going into overload, saying what the hell, and not be able to pump and flow. The next thing is that these guys, well, not these guys, this is more of a cobra myth, hypnotize their prey. And that comes from the guy playing the flute. Do I have my basket in here? I do. I got a prop for this. That comes from people with these. They'd put a cobra in there and they'd play the flute. And they'd pull the lid off and the cobra would stand up and they'd do the whole movement thing. And the guy would play the flute back and forth. And it was this hypnotizing thing. Like they were hypnotizing the cobra. That also those snakes could hypnotize their prey. And they'd get that because that prey would often sit there. It would freeze and just like, oh shit, you're a big bad snake? Well, let me just hang out here and wait for you to kill me. One, the snake isn't really hearing the flute very well because of the previous myth. What is actually happening is the snake is responding to the movement because cobras respond to movement a lot more than, say, pythons. Pythons will need heat and movement because of the heat-sensing pits that cobras lack. So, they're not being hypnotized. They're responding to the movement stimulation. The prey isn't being hypnotized. The prey is doing what it's designed to do. That prey, from years and years of evolution, also understands that movement will often cause predators to strike. So a prey has a couple options. Prey's not usually going to choose stand and fight. It will occasionally in that fight or flight method. There's kind of a third one for a lot of prey items. And it's fight, flight, or just sit fucking still, alright? So if it's going to run, it's going to try to take off if it has an escape route. The other thing they'll do is freeze. Think about a deer in the headlights. Your car hasn't hypnotized that deer, okay? That deer isn't like, oh, it's a car, I'm hypnotized, turn me into a barking chicken. It doesn't work that way. But what is happening is that prey item, in this case the deer or the rodent, is going to freeze. And hope that if I don't move, you won't see me. And if you won't see me, you won't try to eat me because I'm going to rely on my natural camouflage or the fact that many predators' eyes are tuned to movement. And if there's no movement, chance for them to hit is a lot less. The problem is that prey will eventually move its eye or flinch a little bit or do something. And that snake will be like, ha, got you, sucker. And it's over, right? The deer will just stand there and wait for the Volkswagen to hit it. I don't know why. Or in my case, my wife's Cadillac to hit it, which has happened twice. We love deer, though. They taste good. But it's not a hypnotism. It is just the normal reaction to predator and prey. And I think that's all of our myths. Kurt, you got anything you want to add?
No.
All right, guys, that is it. So in retrospect, snakes hear, but not like normal. Snakes do not hypnotize their prey, nor do they get hypnotized. They do not always kill by asphyxiation. More likely than not, it's by a massive cardiac event. And I think we missed out a few, but that's okay. You remember them anyway. All right, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.